Welcome back to Wet Pastel Techniques. I'm Pastelist Avon Waters, and this channel is all about getting you used to wet pastels, and today's example is no exception. If you're new to wet pastel, today's video is going to help you. Today's video is all about taking a painting that has either been abandoned or about taking your painting past the alcohol and water wash. What I have here is an old painting that I found that was a demo of using open acrylic medium to wash in powdered soft pastel that had a design. That's long been lost, the drawing and the reference. So I found this and I like the design, and you can see if I turn it different directions, it will have a different feel. Originally it was this way, and as I turn it, I ultimately decided that I wanted to use it upside down from its original orientation. I like that design. So I'm going to paint that today, and I'm going to show you how, after you've got your wash in, whether it was an alcohol wash or a water wash, after you've blocked in some image, or preferably you find something on the shelf yourself that you have abandoned and you don't know what reference it is. If not, wash something up, take something off the shelf, wipe some of the pastel off, and just try to see if you can wash out that old design. Set it aside, don't try to find the original, and just let the painting try to tell you where it wants to go. But if you're so new that you still want to use a source, that's fine. What we're going to do is I am going to show you one of many methods that you can proceed after the wash has already been done. It's just one method. I call it the whisper method. So let's get started. Let me show you the finished product. Here it is. Here are some of the close-ups of what was left after the demo. Here are the pastels that I decided to select. You can see I only used 2 out of the lighter end of the value scale. If you turn these colors to gray, you will get light values. And most of them are in the 6 and 7 value range once these colors are turned to gray. And if you're enjoying these videos, please hit the like button or subscribe. That lets others see it. So let's get started on the actual painting, and I'll tell you how I proceeded. Maybe that will help you as you decide how to finish something as the alcohol is already dry. Let's start by taking a look at some of the brush strokes that were left when the open acrylic medium was first applied. As you can see, the design is kind of an L shape. If you're familiar with Edgar Payne, I was demonstrating a compositional design known as the L. But you can see this brush strokes in this, and that's what I've decided to start to follow. Now, I began by taking some of the peachy, kind of red-violet, and finding on the surface of this where some of the same values were. Now you'll notice I'm not pressing very hard at all. I am following those vertical marks that were left by the brush strokes that had dried. There is just a little bit of texture in this from those brush strokes, even though it was acrylic medium. This is a UArt 400 grade sanded paper that the medium and the design was first placed over. The touch is, as I said, kind of just whispering over. If you are familiar with oil painting or acrylic painting, the process might be considered or compared to scumbling. You're just scumbling over the surface and putting a few just hits and skips and jumps of whatever color you pick up. I've switched to kind of a gray. It is also in, there's only 2 colors I selected. If you go back and look at that example of the pastels. The pastels I picked out in the 8, 9, and 10 were this kind of peachy color and this blue-gray. So I'm going through and I'm finding on that ghosts that were left from the acrylic the values that come similar to those colors that I pick up and add. I've switched to a gray value that would be considered in the 7, 8, 6, 7, and 8 range, and it's almost an aqua color. So I'm finding those places on this, and I'm just kind of scumbling in or whispering over those areas. Now, one thing I want you to notice too is you see the big dark area. If you don't use alcohol, if you use another wet medium that is something other than alcohol and water, the soft pastels will blend with that and often go much darker. And that's what has happened here. The large shape on the left-hand side and where I'm working right now on the horizon. I'm trying to scumble over some blue and blue violets over into some of that darker area, but I'm not pressing very hard at all. I am just very lightly going over those areas that are dark, but I'm letting what I have called in other videos skips and jumps. I'm letting some of that dark show through. So it actually misleads our eye and makes that dark appear lighter than it was, but still not as light as if I had pressed hard using this color and wiped out all that dark underneath. I am after these skips and jumps that show through and create a feeling that is more transparent. And that's one way that you can do it with dry pastels, putting the soft pastel over what was once wet, and where the wet pastel turned the soft pastel is much darker, you're able to create some of those effects as little sparkling shadows. Albert Handel calls the shadows where the secrets lie. And in a way he's right, because inside, once you get that all covered up, you get these very, very interesting effects that pop through some of that color that you place over it. So I've switched now and I've moved over. This was a 12 by 12 piece of sanded UArt, and it's not mounted. It was just taped onto a board to do the demo at a workshop. And so when the wet pastel technique with the composition of L was used, it left a border on there. And I've taken the tape that created that 12 by 12 border off, and it's about a 14 by 14. So as I'm working over the wet pastel, the only raw canvas or raw sanded paper are in those border areas. The wet pastel technique blocked in some undercolor, and that's why this light whispering touch works so well, is that you're able to create additional layers every time you pick up a different pastel and you move into these areas. You're creating different layers that the pastel underneath lets show through some of that wash. So that wash is very important. And although I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but although this was in an open acrylic medium, yours doesn't have to be that. If you're just getting started in wet pastel, alcohol and water are perfectly fine mediums to stick with. But as you gain more experience, you'll find that different materials will create different effects. So the more wet mediums that you can wash over those soft pastels, that once you block in some shapes, the more likely you'll have a lot of variation that you can work with later on, as this painting takes you from the wash stage, the blocking in stage, and we're trying to demonstrate how you get past the beginnings and into the middle and final stages of painting. So you'll see that every pastel I pick up is part of a set of hues that I selected. And the hues I selected are in a way complement of one another. The peachy colors are yellows and red violets, which go really well with the oranges and the yellow oranges. And in this case, here's an example of a very light green yellow or yellow green. It's on the verge, you could call it either one, but by mixing this and scumbling it over some of those very red violet and peachy colors, I'm creating grays. Now grays are very important when it comes to working on a painting. You can use saturated colors in a lot of places, but if you don't lay in grays next to some of those saturated colors, the painting will become garish. It will become too bright all over. So as you select your colors to paint with, as I did in the beginning of this, think in terms of which ones you can lay over the others to create grays. Since that lime green is a combination of yellow and green, then the green is opposite of red and the yellows are opposite of violet. So those give me two options to place that lime green over to create grays, and that's what I'm doing here. Hans Hofmann, who was an instructor of many great artists that we admire today, Wolf Kahn being one of them. Hans Hofmann, he talked about the push and the pull method of abstract painting. And while Wolf Kahn started out trying to do a few abstractions, he ended up working as a landscape painter. Now, this is looking like an abstraction because I'm just following those brush strokes and letting the painting tell me where I need some verticals and where I need this value or that value left by the very thin wash left behind in that wet process. That's all that I'm doing is following those lines. And Hans Hofmann, in his process, talked about pushing and pulling colors. And that's what mixing those grays on the canvas does, is it allows you to strategically place some of those grayed down colors against more vibrant colors, and the vibrant colors pop more. Now you saw there on the right and lower right, I placed a mark on the tape. I am trying to put those marks there. Sometimes I put them before I even start painting. But I put those marks there because it's helping me locate those kind of golden thirds that we look for when we work on compositions. There I put another one on the right hand side and out of the frame at the top. So this is an area that I want to, as I start to build up different colors from what I selected, I am trying to use this area and remember where some of those intersecting 1/3 marks are that compositionally can become future areas of centers of interest. And so in this particular painting, I kept those centers of interest in those 1/3 intersections and down a line from top to bottom as I began to paint in the lighter hues of the color families that I chose. You'll see that I'm working my way across and into these areas. When this piece started, you remember we had a big bright orange spot from the wet pastel technique that we used to block it in. So now I'm breaking up that broad area of orange and using the family hues that are related to that orange to create that center of interest as the eye is pushed and pulled forward and around. I'm using not only the compositional L that Edgar Payne called the L shape, but I'm also using color values and color temperature, or the change of the chromas from the intensity to the less intense, to move the eye back and forth, moving it back in space, moving it forward in space, and just following again what was left from the previous wet brush in with that open acrylic. And I can't stress enough, it's not important whether this was open acrylic or whether it was alcohol. Each gives you a different effect. If I had used alcohol, I wouldn't have as dark of color that was left behind when the alcohol mixed with whatever value I originally put on that L shape to create that design for the students in that workshop. So it's unimportant that I'm painting over an open acrylic, but it's the process of taking it from the wash-in stage or blocked-in stage after it's dry and taking you into the painting. If you get nothing out of this at all, what you need to remember is that we are looking at trying to follow those lines that were left in the wet process, and we're trying to match the values by using the different color hues we select as our palette, and build the painting up with mark making. You notice up to this point I have not rubbed in, used a roller, used my end of my finger or anything to blend anything together. I am just using the stick and the variation of my pressure as I whisper those colors over one another. And that's creating multiple layers, which at the end will zoom in to the top and bottom of this and let you see a little closer some of those layers that I'm seeing when I'm painting it close up that you can't see in this particular version. Now another thing that is happening here is as I fill in the borders, you'll remember that this had a lot of vertical strokes, and I've tried to keep those there. And there's a lot of vertical color, even though the brush strokes went right and left in the, what, if you saw this as a landscape as I do, what were the sky and the trees maybe off in the distance and in the foreground. There were horizontal brush strokes there, but the colors used still went vertical. So I am using intuitive skills that I just learned as an experienced artist, and I'm going to start making, you'll see a few there on the left, I'm going to start making some of those colors I pick up, like right there, I'm making horizontal marks following some of those brush strokes that are underneath those broad colors. Because if I didn't do that, even though the brush strokes with the underpainting went vertical and horizontal, the broad color usage that I painted in would tend to be too vertical. So I am very selectively finding places where I can make some horizontal marks, and I don't make them one continuous line. They're just very small marks, and the combination of them together gets us to a horizontal feel in places. So it breaks up some of that vertical movement that, had I just followed the colors, even though I followed the brush strokes, had I used the same color as I did in the underpainting, everything would tend to be too vertical. So by breaking these color swaths up, that big giant orange area that was to the the right and went down the right 1/3 of the painting and compositionally. And by breaking up those darks that make that L shape originally in the composition, by breaking those lines up with a few small mark making lines with a variation of the color families that I selected, it becomes much more interesting than if I would have allowed my hands to go only up and down in the same manner, filling in those big broad areas that were blocked in with just orange and dark. So I'm getting close to putting some of the finishing touches on. There are some things I feel that I've got kind of some things I still will probably want to do after the video on that dark vertical area that represents a tree that's maybe closer to us. But I consider this a landscape, but it's very abstract. I don't know who said that every landscape starts out as an abstract, but that's very true. When we block these things in, whether you're using traditional methods where you block in broad areas of color, or whether you're using wet pastel techniques, which is what I'm here to help you with, those wet pastel techniques still block in and make large shapes, and those large shapes are just basically they're an abstract form until you decide how much detail you're going to add, how much color variation, and your mark making. I love the way that this has stayed kind of misty and foggy, and that goes along well with my tonalistic style. So let's look at some close-ups now, and you can see some of the mark making. You see those verticals, you see those horizontals in the lower 1/3 of this painting, and you see how we have a push and pull. And in the upper part of this, we also can see how the dark was maintained to create a form that comes forward, while those lighter colors there in the right 1/3 and upper 1/3 going down to the lower 1/3, those colors push the eye back. So I hope that helps and gives you a good idea by seeing some of this up close up. I hope you enjoyed that process, and I hope that it helps you. And if you're enjoying these videos, please hit the like button or subscribe. That lets others see it. So until next time, keep your powder dry and your pastels wet, and happy painting. Bye-bye. Okay, let's try another.